This is part 2 for the Sony TC540 reel-to-reel overhaul. If you haven't watched part 1, I'd recommend watching it first so you know where we're starting here. We have one channel that's not working. We're going to fix that and do complete restoration. So we're working on part 2 of this video, and I just want to show you guys because I had someone comment about checking the brakes, and I explained to the viewer that it had nothing to do with the brakes, that the brakes on here are just fine. The reason why the tape was spilling was because of the tape reel size. So I've put another small tape reel on here, and we'll see. I'll rewind this. As you can see, no tape spillage. Okay, I've taken this recording, and what I've done is I want to start with a clean slate because this original tape had been recorded on a half-track mono machine. Now, whenever you use a half-track tape that's previously been recorded, you need to bulk erase it with a proper tape eraser. Let me explain why. So here is a very crude illustration about how half-track versus 4-track recordings are laid down. Now, a full track mono would actually use the full width of the tape. So this applies if you had a full track recorded tape. Even more so if you had a full track mono from, say, an old broadcast recorder. You would have to wipe the tape as well before you could use it on a half track or a quarter track. The reason for that is, and I'm only going to illustrate here for the half track mono. So on a half track mono, the head covers 1/2 of the tape width, and it records your recording. And then at the end of the tape, you turn the tape over and you turn the tape up the other way, and it becomes the opposite direction. Between the two tracks, there's a very, very small unrecorded area of the tape called a guard track. That's so that you don't get spillover from one side of the tape to the other. If that wasn't there and your playback head wasn't perfectly aligned, you would actually hear the other recording from the other track being played back. Now, when we take this tape that's already got a recording on it in this format and we try to make it into a 4-track tape, such as we've got here, well, you'll see that how a 4-track tape is laid out is you have your left track for your A direction, left here, and right. And then the other direction is going to be your B right and your B left. And again, there's a slight guard track in between here where nothing is recorded. And that means the erase head that's ahead of the record play head also doesn't erase into the guard track. It erases just this section here. And it doesn't touch anything in the guard track when you're recording. So a 4-track machine would erase that and that. Okay, now we put the tape on in playback. Now you remember, the guard track's not supposed to have anything in it, but because the erase head is not going to erase that track, it's only going to erase approximately where the head is going to be. If your alignment is between your erase head and your record play head, or your record and play head is not absolutely perfect, well, the other information that's still here because it was recorded on a half track before, right? The other information that's still existing is going to be on the tape. So in other words, as I'm recording in this direction here, I'm erasing this portion of the tape. I'm not touching what was here. So there's still going to be some sound left over from the previous recording, and if there was something on the opposite direction of the tape had been turned over, there's going to be all of the other material that hasn't been erased. And when you play it back, because there's no guard track, there is going to be some spillover, and you're going to hear the other program material that was still on the tape. And that's what happened when I played this tape yesterday on this machine. Was I played a tape that had been recorded on a half-track machine, and even though I recorded over it, you could still hear some of the racket that was on the tape from the previous recording. So to start out this video, while we're going to service this electronics on this rig, I noticed that after I serviced the mechanism, it wasn't recording on the right channel. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to service that. Now what I've done is I wiped this tape, and I'm going to, I've gone and I've made a recording using my Akai 4000 so that I have a reference recorded in quarter track to play back. So first, before I even dig into the electronics, I want to verify that this thing is playing a proper stereo tape, because when I tried it yesterday, of course, I was playing a tape that had existing recordings that were done on a half-track mono machine, and they are just not going to play correctly on a quarter-track machine. Not going to happen. Let's check this out and see whether this machine will play this tape that I've recorded on a known good machine. That doesn't sound right, does it? I don't hear any sound on the right channel. But I do hear something here. Interesting. What do you guys think the problem might be? I can hear the right channel when I touch the head wires. And if I crank it up, I'm hearing a lot of noise. So I think we have more than just a record problem on this machine. I haven't even tried to make a recording. I've got to make it play back properly. And what I suspect has happened on this machine is when I had this out, the mechanism out to lubricate it, I get a feeling that maybe one of these wires down here has broken on the head, and that's why we're not getting any playback. Let's just take a close-up look and see whether I'm right. But let's get a close-up look here. I do believe that wire is broken right there. I believe that one of the head wires is broken. Let's resolder it and see whether it fixes the problem for playback, and then we'll make another recording and see if this thing's actually working. I have a feeling that that's the problem. When this was taken out to repair it, that wire broke off that binding post. First, I'll start by just removing the tape completely from the unit. We don't need to have any tape around there, and I can actually see the wire here that's broken, so I'm just going to heat it up a bit to expose the copper, and then we're going to tack it right back down where it came off of this connector here. Something to always be aware of when you're working on stuff like this is that especially when you're moving around wires that are, you know, secured down, that you got to be careful. And I was very careful when I was working on this unit, but even at that, just twisting this a few times is all it took to pop that wire off. There's a little better close-up. You can see what I'm talking about here. This wire right here has come off. So I'm just going to heat it up a bit to melt some of the insulation so that I can solder it back down. I believe I've got it. Yep, that should be good. Let's thread the tape back up and listen to the music. On both channels this time. There we go, both channels working. Excellent. this goes into fast forward, there's a button that sits over top of here, which is right here. When you push it in, it pushes that mechanism in there, right? You can see what it's doing up here. Maybe you can't, but it moves this idler out. So when you press this in and then turn it to forward, it goes into fast forward. I'm just going to wind this to the end of the song, and then I'm going to make a recording. And I'll actually make a recording at all 3 speeds on this deck, and we'll test it out and see how it performs. That's one thing that I noticed about the Sony. And see, the flywheel doesn't run all the time. This is what I like about my Akai decks and my TIAC decks, is that the flywheel is always running. So when you hit record or hit play, it's going at the right speed, whereas this one takes a second to get up to speed. So on all these Sony decks, if you want instant start, you pretty much have to put the pause lever down here. That way it gets the capstan up to speed, and then you can... That's one thing that always annoyed me about these Sony reel-to-reels. Other than that, these things are workhorses, right? They just go forever. And looking at this mechanism, this looks almost identical to that Radio Shack one, which I believe was a Hitachi made, but it was probably made by Sony as well, because I remember these rollers that I had to ungum or had to put rubber renew on. Even at that, they're not in great shape. This one's in perfect shape, but they're reliable. It's a long song. Okay, this is the end of the song here. So I'm going to hit the pause. We'll put this thing into record. Set my levels. Zero the tape counter. Now I got to find something to play. Got so many tracks on this thing that, yeah, this will go to track 277, I think that was. Yeah, 277, we'll do that one. So here's 277, roll. I'm going to record this track at 7.5, and I'll do it again at 3 3/4, and then we'll do it at 1 7/8, and see how it sounds. See the sound difference on this for the 3 different speeds. And then if it's recording, like I hope it is, I'm pretty confident that the problem's solved. Then I can put this thing back together, and we'll test it out one last time using the built-in amplifier and speakers. Oh, I still got to clean the other controls too, before I forget. We'll do the other controls here for the amplifier side when I finish the recordings here. One thing I don't know if I've mentioned or not, but this tape that I'm using, this tape is at least 50 years old. I was given some tapes and an old machine that I haven't repaired because it's got multiple problems, including needing a new pinch roller that's disintegrated on it. But we'll stop that here. So I got to change the speed down to the next speed, and we'll start that same track over again. Okay, same track at 3 3/4, so that we can get a reference of the sound quality. So I was given a machine with a box full of tapes, some brand new tapes that have never been used, and this is one that had been used, and it had a bunch of junk recorded on it at 3 3/4 in mono, and a lot of stuff recorded off the radio, right? So I wiped it. And actually it was on a little bit bigger spool, and I cut it up to make the small spool for testing in that little portable unit. So I've just been kind of using this tape for testing stuff on, but this is certainly not a new tape, and you can tell from the brown oxide color that this is just a standard tape, nothing fancy. I do have tons of reel-to-reel tapes, probably 30, 40, maybe 50 reel-to-reel tapes in a collection, maybe more. That someday I should actually sit down and transcribe over to digital, because I'm sure that it's got some pretty good stuff on it. I haven't listened to them. Anyway, even for the age of this tape, it's probably going to sound okay, but of course a more modern tape is going to perform a lot better on an old deck like this. But I want to get this deck up and running, make sure it's in great condition, because this one's going to be going up for sale for anyone who's collecting reel-to-reel machines. This is a collector's item these days, and I got too many reel-to-reel machines. I don't need any more. So this one and the other Sony I'm going to probably sell the Grundig as well, because again, I've got more tape recorders than I know what to do with them. And there's always people looking for these vintage machines that are working, because there's lots of them out there that are in this state that I got this. So whoever gets this one will be getting a machine that's going to be good for many years of use. If we look down here on the flywheel, it looks like, just from the dark ring that's on here, that this is probably the speed that this was used at most often, and 1 7/8. You can see another dark ring here, but on the 7.5 you don't see any wear from the tire. So I have a feeling that whoever owned this machine before me made most of their recordings either at 3 3/4 or 1 7/8, so they never even got to experience what this recorder was capable of doing. Okay, we come up to the end of the recording for 3 3/4. I'll stop it, and then we're going to switch this down to 1 7/8, which is the next speed down. You'll notice that the little pulley here is going to change to the edge, and then we'll get this thing set to start recording again. Again, we'll pick the same song. So I'm going to hit my back button here, and now we're recording at 1 7/8. So when I put this together, you'll hear the difference in the quality between the 3 speeds, and there will be a dramatic difference in the sound quality between the 3 speeds. Now, some of you might ask why I'm not going to replace all the capacitors in. Why don't you recap it? I know I'm going to get asked that question. Why don't you recap it? Well, the reality is, in most cases, capacitors are not going to fail. Not in this application. Recapping amps and recapping electronics was a good way for electronic shops to pad the bill and make a lot of extra money. Sometimes replacing 1 or 2 caps is required because the capacitor has failed. And in vacuum tube equipment, you always went in and changed out the paper caps on it, always. But in low power coupling capacitors and so forth used in circuits such as in here, they generally don't go bad unless they're physically damaged where the electrolytic is able to leak out. But other than that, they generally don't fail. And the older ones actually last longer than the new ones, because the older ones were typically filled with an oil as opposed to a water-based electrolytic. And of course, oil doesn't evaporate. So a lot of these old ones here are actually in fine condition. There's some that can go bad, but again, once one's gone bad, you'll know it, because it's going to sound bad. You'll know that that's gone bad. As far as going in and just replacing every cap inside the unit, sometimes you can actually make matters worse, because the new ones might not have been to the same spec as the originals, just because they manufacture them different now. So changing them all can have a detrimental effect on the sound, at least from my experience. Going in and just replacing every cap in an amplifier can actually make it sound worse than not changing it. You know, it's a touchy subject. Some people will insist you have to do it, but again, it was something that was manufactured by a lot of repair shops, and a lot of high-end repair shops at that would go and say you've got to change every capacitor in it, you know, and they would sell it off as like, these are all little time bombs, they're all going to blow up, it's going to cause problems. No, it's not. It might cause the sound quality to change if a cap goes bad, but generally you don't have to replace all of them. There are certain ones that are going to fail, the ones that are put under stress, such as power supply capacitors. Those ones there, they can go bad. A lot of times the signal ones don't go bad unless they're physically damaged. and that's just the way it is. It wasn't until we got into the 1980s where we started seeing just really crappy caps, and that's a lot of time what happened there was they changed the formulation of capacitors because they had to get a lot of the oils that were used in capacitors. And when I say oils, I'm referring to PCBs. A lot of the really older ones, you know, the ones from the 60s and into the early 70s, a lot of the older ones had PCB oil in them. And of course, PCBs are bad. They're carcinogens. So they weren't allowed to continue manufacturing them. They had to come up with an alternative, and the alternative just did not have the reliability of the old ones. So I generally won't change caps on an old piece of equipment unless I know for sure that they are bad. With one exception. If I'm dealing with the bumblebee caps or the paper wax caps in old tube equipment, then yes, I'll change every one of them because they do go bad. They have a bad track record, and they do fail, and they become leaky, and they can cause other components to burn out. But in solid state units such as this, generally they aren't as big a problem as some would like you to believe. Okay, this is now finished recording, so I'm going to rewind this tape back to my tape counter starting point of 0, and we'll take a sample. I'm not going to play the whole song, so we'll play a little bit from the beginning of it, and then we'll move up to the next recording of it and play it back, and I'll put all three together and we'll see the difference in the sound quality. I'll play maybe 30 seconds of the beginning of each of the track, and that way we can hear the difference in the sound quality. See, the brakes work fine. And playback. Let's take a listen. This is 7.5 IPS. Listen to the sound quality. So that's it. You've heard the comparison. We're going to rewind this now. I'm going to clean the controls. We'll lubricate the other rollers and stuff, the bearings here. I'm going to put a little bit of oil in the bearings before sending it out. And we're going to clean the controls, put this thing back together, and do a final test on it. And then this one will be ready to go. So we're going to start by removing the belt. I'm going to take, it's a good size thick belt, look at that. That thing will never break. I'm going to take the actual E-clips off, or C-clips I guess these ones are, and we're going to clean the bearing up here and lubricate it. So the way to do this right is not to just shoot some lubricant down there and hope that it's going to get in there and clean up the bearing. The right way to do this is you actually have to take the unit apart and put some oil actually on the bearing itself. Maybe even clean off the old crap first. So we get a Q-tip here, and we're going to wipe off the old grease and put some new lubricant on there so that this thing's good for many, many more years. I don't think I'm gonna bother with the tape. Might do the tape hubs too. I don't think I'm going to bother with the tape hubs themselves because they aren't making any noise and they seem to be spinning quite freely. Right. Yeah, these ones, the tape hubs are spinning fine. So I'm not going to bother taking them off. I'm just going to do the rollers that do a lot of spinning. Like these ones are running constantly, right? When they're in play or rewind or fast forward, or even when the motor's running, these are always spinning. So these are the ones that really need the lube more than anything else. Yeah, look at how black this is. Clean off the old grease, the old lubricant that's in pretty sad shape here. Same on the actual roller itself. This piece goes back in here. It only goes in one way too. There's a little key on it that has to fit in this groove. So this fits in like that. And that goes back on there. Going to put a little bit of oil on the shaft here. Doesn't need to be much. Too much oil is worse than not enough. We'll put the we'll just put another drop on the top there. That'll work its way in. I don't want to put too much in because I don't want it spinning out and getting on the belt, right? So you gotta kind of be careful that you don't put too much oil on, because otherwise you could end up creating more of a mess and creating additional problems that you didn't have before. Okay, put that back on. Now, put the belt back in place. There we go. Okay, that one's done. These ones have little caps on them. That's actually to keep the oil from spilling out and getting onto the flywheel. See, this one's got a bit of a felt pad around here, which is going to absorb any lubricant that sneaks out of that bearing. But these other ones here don't. So if you have too much oil in here, they are going to actually contaminate the unit itself. This one's not all grimy like the other one was. A drop of oil in there. Drop this tire back on. And put the E-clip back on top. Lock it in place and put the plastic top piece back on here. Now, one thing I have to tell you, when you're taking this off, be very careful. Don't put any downward pressure on it, because it will bend. This arm will bend, and then if that happens, it will not engage at the right place to drive the capstan. So I'm just looking to make sure that I'm tracking correctly. Yeah, it's right on the exact spot where the other one was. Otherwise, it won't be tracking on the right pulley if you bend it down, for example. There. So that's working fine. But that's something you got to keep in mind when you take this off, is you got to be careful taking off that E-clip. Don't put any unnecessary downward pressure. Same with this one here. When you take this off, you want to kind of support it so that you don't bend the mechanism underneath there, because these metal mechanisms are quite thin, and it doesn't take much. If you see, just pressing on there, you see that just ever so slightly pressing on here, it doesn't take much to bend them. So you got to be mindful of that when you're taking these rollers off to clean up the bearing underneath there, that you have to make sure that you don't put excessive pressure on, because that can do more damage. For one, if you bend it, the idler tire won't be meshing 100% true. It'll be riding along the edge of the tire, which is going to wear it down a lot quicker. So let's clean this one up. Same thing. Put some oil in there. Just a drop. That's all that's needed. Oops. And you don't want to lose your clips, that's for sure. There. And that's back on. So now I turn this thing on. Tape's moving. Rewind and fast forward. Lots of torque. Lots of torque on there. Okay, that takes care of the lubrication of the bearings. Next, we'll clean the other controls. Now, I did get asked in the last video when one of my viewers saw me using Neutral contact cleaner on the record level controls and asked why I was using Neutral as opposed to Deoxit. Okay, Deoxit is a superior cleaner. I found from my own experience. This stuff is really good stuff. Neutral cleaner is also very good, but there are two kinds of Neutral cleaner. There's the old vintage Neutral, which this is from the 1980s. I've had this can since about 1983 or 84. And you'll see that what it's got in here, okay? These are the chemicals that are in this one. Tetrafluorethane and petroleum seal oil and hexane isomers. This stuff is good. This is very good. You cannot buy this contact cleaner anymore. If you buy a new one, the new Neutral is basically diesel, smells like diesel oil. And it's alcohol based with an oil in it. But it's not the same stuff as this. They can't make this stuff anymore because tetrafluorethane is no longer allowed to be used, because this is a CFC and it will eat the ozone. So if you've got this stuff's like gold. It's very good. And this particular old Neutral, the old stock, which I've got, this is all I've got, but this can's almost full, so I use it very sparingly. It's good stuff. The D5 Deoxit is very good a product as well. Of the current cleaners that you can buy, I think this is probably the best that you can get of the current cleaners. Okay, none of the current cleaners, well, I think this is probably, I don't think the formulation's changed much in the last 60 years on this one, but as far as what you can buy today, this stuff is as good as it gets. This stuff here, which was made in Canada, this stuff came out of Toronto, this one, but this stuff was, the older generation Neutral was very good. This was actually developed by Bell Laboratories for the telephone industry in the days of the Strauger switches, right, and the crossbar switches. This is what they used to use to maintain the switches. It does keep the contacts clean. And even it says on here, selector switches, contacts, controls, relays, office equipment, servo mechanisms, and it's safe on plastic. This stuff was really good, but again, you can't buy it anymore. So out of the new stuff, this stuff is great. But a little can like this costs about 25 bucks. A little can of the new Neutral, which is in about the same size as this, is about 10 bucks. So the new Neutral is a lot cheaper. This stuff's good. When I can't get any more of this, when I use this stuff up, I'll go to using this stuff. But they're both very good. They're both very good cleaners. And then the high purity 100, the D100, which I've also got, this is great for getting right into controls and stuff. I use this on my own equipment that I'm keeping because I think it's a better cleaner. But for other people's equipment, I quite often will use this just because I've got lots of it. The can is, say, almost full, and I don't use that much. Anyway, that's just my own opinion on cleaners. So if you see me using Neutral versus Deoxit, It's not that one's better than the other. This version of Neutral is every bit as good as the Deoxit, but I think the new version of Neutral is not as good. Okay, so comparing cleaners that you can buy today, if you're ordering a can of cleaner, I would buy this, not that, because this is better than the new version of this. That's all I have to say about that. Let's clean the controls. If we look in the side here, here's the bias adjustments for the left and right channel, which I'm not going to have to adjust because they're paint sealed, they haven't been touched, but this thing's recording properly. When I did a test recording there, the sound quality off that recording sounded every bit as good as the original when I was recording at 7.5. So there's no need to start messing around with the bias controls on this unit. So I'm just going to give it a little shot of cleaner into the back of each of these controls. And here. And we'll rotate all the controls a few times. Clean them up. And then we're going to put this thing back together and see how it performs into its built-in speakers. We can clean this wafer switch here. This is the selector switch to select which track you want to listen to or record on. I guess it's playback. Record is selected by pressing the record switches on the front. Okay, time to hook up the built-in speakers. Forgot, there is one more switch here at the top, which is actually part of the speed selector. So it must change the equalization on playback. There's another switch up here. So we'll just give this one a shot. Make sure that that one's clean as well. Okay, the first thing we have to do is remove the knob and the selector so that I can put the front faceplate back on, and I have to get the fast forward button in here first. Okay, we'll see if I can get this all in place by just holding this in here and putting the front faceplate on. It slides in underneath here. There's a lip on the front. You got to kind of lift up the tape meters, get them into place. Like that, and then this slides in place. There, I think it goes on kind of like that. Now we'll put a couple of these retaining screws in to hold it in place while I get the alignment right. There we go. That's a bit better. Okay, now time to reattach the control. Oops. Would help if I get it on properly. And I believe I was in 3 3/4. We'll just check the speed here. 7.5, 1 7/8. Yeah, okay. Just gonna make that straight up and down. Instant stop control. Push that on. Head guide goes back on here, held in place with a couple of set screws. Okay, we first have to connect the two speakers. Again, they're keyed, so they only go in one direction. One pin is bigger than the other. And then the unit just slides into the cabinet like this. And it's held in place by these straps that go in through the top. That's two screws. There's another one on the bottom, and there's some more that go in the back. Put the jack panel back in here, secure it in place. There's one more screw that goes in the bottom that secures the deck to the bottom of the chassis, and then there's the ones that go in the back. I'm lying the unit flat just because when it's standing up on the bench, not being in the cabinet, the machine's actually tilting back slightly, but when it's got the feet on it, it's completely vertical and the spools will fall off. So I'm just putting it on its back for testing. So here we are testing at 7.5. Let's take a look at, or listen to how it sounds. Left channel, right stereo, right channel, and mono. Actually sounds very good.
Tick tock, sticks it up, there's that old alarm again. Stand up, eyes shut, wishing I was sleeping in. Don't know how I do it, but somehow I do it every day. Just to say,
I actually might end up keeping this one myself because it's a 3-speed deck, and all my other machines that I have are only 2-speed, except for my old Akai 1710W, which you take the sleeve off the capstan to get 1 7/8. So I may end up just keeping one of these machines for 1 7/8 in case I get a tape in 1 7/8. So then I'll have all 4 speeds. I'll have 1 7/8, 3 3/4, 7.5, and 15 on the TIAC. Now remember, this recording was made on my Akai, so the next recording that comes up was made on this machine. It sounds awesome. I mean, it really sounds good. And I know it looks stupid with these little 3-inch reels on there. It looks ridiculous, but hey, sounds great. We'll check out some of the other functions, okay? So rewind is working, and fast forward is working. As you can see, no tape spillage. The brakes work fine. It's only because, as I said before, I had one big reel on and one little reel. And of course, the large reel is going to have a much higher mass, so it's going to take longer to stop. So when I rewound it, hit the stop, the little reel stopped quick, but the larger reel with the more mass kept on going. So that's why it's always important you use the same size reels. If you're using a 5-inch reel, you don't want to use a 7-inch. You can get away with it, but you really don't want to. If you're using a 5-inch, you should be using a 5-inch take-up. If you're using a 3-inch, use a 3-inch take-up. 7-inch, 7-inch take-up. You always want to use the same size of reel on both sides. Otherwise, you will end up with tape spilling when you stop it from a high speed. Well, let's listen to all 3 speeds on this again, and this video is done. Okay, 3 3/4 IPS. same thing. Once again, the 1 7/8 through the built-in speakers. There we go. It's fixed. Thanks for watching, and we will catch you in the next one real soon. I've got another Sony reel-to-reel, a 3-head, coming up to service next. We'll catch you later.